All right, guys. So now it's time to start today's activity, which will be number 35 in your notebook. It's called Ocean Zones. To start with, you're going to get a 2-page packet from the sub. The first page has a series of numbers on it. These are distances from North Carolina and the depth of the ocean at those distances. We call this sounding data. For hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, sailors and scientists have measured the depth of the ocean by using weighted ropes that they lowered to the bottom and then measured how long the rope was. These days we use sound waves and remotely operated vehicles like robots that can measure the depth by sending sound waves down, then measuring how long they take to come back up. Basically what we're doing here is a little bit of graphing. So we start with the very first data point, 0 kilometers from North Carolina, 0 kilometers of depth. So we start with 0 kilometers from North Carolina, 0 kilometers of depth, and we're going to put a point there. Next, it's 200 and 200. So 200 is halfway to the next line and halfway to the next line. So we're going to draw a point right there. Then we go to 400 and 600. So 400 and 600. Notice that what I'm doing here is drawing a series of points that I'm going to connect. Now it's 600 and 4,200. 600 and a depth of 4,200. That's going to put us way down here. So I'm going to connect these dots with the straightest line I can. And then I'm going to let you finish this and then play the video again and we'll talk about what happens next. So pause it while you work on plotting these points for about 10 minutes. All right, guys, now you've graphed all your points. You might have made a couple of mistakes, but make sure you get them corrected so that you've got a graph of what the bottom of the ocean would look like, starting at North Carolina and going all the way east to the coast of Africa to our east. As you see, it starts off really shallow. That's what we'd expect. And then it stays shallow for a little while. That area where it stays shallow is called the continental shelf. Continental shelf. There's one on this side and there's one on the other side. And then it gets really, really steep. It drops off. This is called the continental slope. Continental slope is this steep area right here. Then we get to an area where it's flat for a little bit and suddenly it gets really, really deep. This area where the water gets really, really deep is called a trench. You've probably heard about trenches, seen movies with trenches. They're actually pretty rare, but what I want you to notice is that the trench is actually twice as deep as the rest of the ocean. It's not just a little bit deeper, it is a lot deeper. Then we get to an area that's relatively flat. Flat areas are called abyssal plains. Plains like the flat areas in the middle of the United States. In the middle of the ocean, we find an area that's kind of M-shaped. That M-shaped area is called a mid-ocean ridge. We're not going to label it, but it represents a place where the plates that form the surface of the Earth are actually moving away from each other. We'll talk about that more later on, but we're not going to bother labeling it now. Then you'll notice an area that's almost like an underwater mountain. We call this underwater mountain a seamount. And when a seamount gets large enough that it reaches to the surface of the ocean, it's called an island. And that's where islands come from. Like the Japanese islands or the Hawaiian islands. Those are just underwater mountains that have gotten so tall that they have become islands. And then, of course, on the other side of the seamount, we've got another continental slope and another continental shelf. So we've labeled the features of the bottom of the ocean. Now, you're going to get a two-page reading from the sub, and I want you to do one more thing, which is I want you to label the depths of the ocean. Because when it comes to what lives in the ocean, it has a lot to do with the light, and the light decides what can live in a particular area. So pause now, get that sheet, and then use that sheet, and you're actually going to shade in different parts of the ocean, as I'll show you in a second here. Pause now. All right, so now you've read about the ocean zones, it's time to highlight them. I'm going to recommend highlighters here, so you're going to need to share with other people or colored pencils, but otherwise you're not going to be able to read it. So let me help you with the first layer. If you read about the first layer, it's called the sunlight zone, and it extends down to 200 meters. 200 meters is halfway to the first blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in that area at the top of our ocean here. And the first thing that you should notice is that's not a lot of the ocean, right? There's not a lot of ocean that falls into that sunlight zone. Down here at the bottom part, I'm going to write sunlight zone. And write down a couple of things that are true about the sunlight zone. Next comes the twilight zone, which goes down to 1,000 meters. Okay, so that line is about here. So I'm going to shade in all this area below the yellow. Remember that the things that we drew and labeled earlier, like the seamount and the abyssal plains, those are features of the bottom of the ocean. Those are the land. What we're talking about now is the water. So this is called the twilight zone. And your job now is to write down some things that are true about the twilight zone based on the reading. What's going to be true about the animals and plants that live in that blue zone there? Next comes the midnight zone, which goes down to about 4,000 meters, which would be basically to the bottom of most of the ocean here, okay? So all this area is going to be shaded in. Other side of our seamount, all the way up here. I'm going to shade all of this in. And you should do the same thing on your page. All of this ocean here, all the purple area, is called the midnight zone. And from your reading, make sure you fill in some details down here about what makes the midnight zone special. And then you're going to use the trench here to fill in the hadal and abyssal zones. and the same thing, provide some information about them. Now, this page, when it's done, needs to go in your notebook as number 35. This is number 35. The reading is going to go back to the sub to be recycled for another class. And the page that had all the measurements on it, this guy right here, you can toss in the trash. Okay? All right. All right, guys, now we're going to play a game where you're going to use your new information about the ocean zones to guess which one is pictured in each of these photos. Just point to your graph to indicate which one is your answer. Starting with this image here. This brightly colored fish. Which zone of the ocean do you think we're talking about here? Go ahead and point to the one that you think is right. And the correct answer is the sunlight zone. Lots of light means lots of bright colors and lots of plants. The sunlight zone. Next, we have this one. Notice that there are these two worm-looking things, these smoke chimneys coming out. Point to the section of the ocean that you think these are found in. The correct answer is the abyssal zone. These are found in hydrothermal vents. All right, next up. Lots of little microscopic plants. They're green colored, which means there must be lots of sunlight. Point to the zone you think this one is from. Point to the zone on your paper that you think this one is from. The correct answer is the sunlight zone. But you can't have plants without sunlight. All right, here's another one. This guy, scary looking dude. You've probably seen him before. This is an anglerfish. They have a bioluminescent tip on the end of their little stalk they use to bait animals to come in. Point to the right answer for this one, and it is the midnight zone. They live in the pitch blackness of the deep ocean. How about this guy? Take a close look. Decide what zone you think he's from, and go ahead and point to it on your sheet. The correct answer is this octopus is found in the twilight zone. Not brightly colored, but able to change colors, and that would only be useful if there was a little bit of light. This is from the twilight zone.